For most of history, Duke Ellington has been remembered as elegance itself, a symbol of jazz, refinement, and artistic freedom rising out of Harlem during one of the most divided periods in American history. His story is usually told as a triumph of talent, a man whose music transcended race, politics, and the darkness surrounding him, carrying Harlem's voice onto the world's grandest stages. In this version of the legend, jazz is pure expression. Clubs are cultural sanctuaries, and success belongs to those who play beautifully enough to earn it. But this narrative rests on a comforting assumption that art in Harlem existed outside of power. The reality was far quieter and far more controlled. In Harlem, jazz clubs were not just places to perform, they were territory. They moved money, status, and influence, night after night, under an invisible structure that did not need guns to enforce its rules. Owners decided who played, bookers decided who lasted, and behind them stood forces that understood one thing perfectly. Control does not always require violence. Sometimes it only requires the ability to grant or deny access. In that world, talent alone was never enough. Survival depended on knowing when to speak, when to stay neutral, and most importantly, when to remain silent. This is where the familiar story of Duke Ellington becomes incomplete. He did not rise in a vacuum, and he did not perform in a neutral ecosystem. His success unfolded inside a Harlem where jazz was an industry, not just an art form, and where artists who disrupted the balance often disappeared quietly, without headlines or explanations. This video begins by stepping away from the myth of jazz as pure freedom and asking a more dangerous question. Who really controlled Harlem's stages? And what did silence cost the men who played on them? By exploring that question, the image of the Jazz King shifts from simple celebration to something far more complex, revealing a story where power spoke softly and survival depended on listening. In popular history, Duke Ellington is framed as the embodiment of artistic independence, a man who rose through talent alone and turned jazz into a language of freedom during the Harlem Renaissance. Textbooks, documentaries, and concert retrospectives present his career as proof that music could exist above politics, crime, and coercion, untouched by the darker forces surrounding Harlem nightlife. In this myth, jazz clubs are imagined as cultural sanctuaries, places where creativity ruled and success belonged to those who played best. Ellington appears as a gentleman composer, focused on refinement, elegance, and innovation, standing apart from the chaos of the streets. This narrative is comforting because it separates art from power. It suggests that while Harlem may have been dangerous, jazz floated above it, protected by beauty and respectability. Ellington's polished image reinforces this idea. He dressed impeccably, spoke carefully, and avoided public controversy, making it easy to believe that his world was insulated from the realities faced by other performers. In the myth, his orchestra succeeds because audiences recognize genius, promoters reward quality, and the music industry functions as a neutral marketplace of taste. But this version of events depends on a selective lens. It treats Harlem as a backdrop rather than an ecosystem, and jazz as expression rather than business. What it quietly ignores is that every performance required permission, every residency depended on approval, and every long-term success required stability in venues that operated late at night, moved large amounts of cash, and attracted attention from people who understood power far better than critics did. By framing jazz as pure art, the myth removes the economic and territorial realities that shaped who was allowed to thrive. The idea of Ellington as an artist, untouched by control, also relies on contrast. Other figures in Harlem are remembered for violence, conflict, or downfall, while Ellington's career appears smooth and uninterrupted. This contrast reinforces the illusion that he simply chose a higher path. Yet smoothness itself demands explanation. In an environment where artists routinely vanished from lineups, lost bookings overnight, or were quietly pushed out, uninterrupted success was not accidental. The myth of jazz's freedom does not lie outright. It omits context. It highlights brilliance while erasing constraint. It celebrates sound while ignoring the silence that surrounded it. By presenting Duke Ellington as a figure who rose purely through art, the story prepares us to miss the more uncomfortable truth that follows. That freedom in Harlem's jazz world was not the absence of control, but the ability to navigate it without ever challenging it openly. The reality surrounding Duke Ellington begins with a fact the myth avoids. Harlem jazz was not a free artistic commons. It was an industry, tightly bound to nightlife economics, real estate, cash flow, and gatekeeping. Clubs were businesses first. They paid rent, managed staff, moved large amounts of money after dark, and relied on predictable crowds. In an environment like that, art followed infrastructure, not the other way around. Musicians did not simply show up and play. They were booked, scheduled, approved, and, when necessary, removed. Club ownership sat at the center of this system. Owners controlled stages, hours, and contracts, and many operated under informal arrangements that ensured stability and quiet. Booking agents and promoters acted as filters, deciding who rotated through prime slots and who remained invisible. These decisions were rarely explained publicly. A band could lose a residency without warning. A name could vanish from marquees overnight. No violence was required. Access was the lever, and access was everything. In this structure, talent was necessary but never sufficient. Ellington's career unfolded inside this machinery. His orchestra depended on long residencies, reliable pay, and venues that could sustain complex arrangements night after night. That stability required relationships, carefully maintained, deliberately unprovocative relationships with the people who controlled rooms and schedules. The myth frames Ellington as an artist who floated above such concerns. The reality shows an artist who understood them deeply. He built a reputation not just for musical excellence, but for professional reliability, predictability, and non-disruption, qualities prized by any controlled industry. It is important to be precise here. This is not an accusation of wrongdoing or collusion. It is an explanation of how survival worked. Harlem's jazz economy rewarded those who fit smoothly into its rhythms. Musicians who brought controversy, challenged arrangements, or created instability often found themselves edged out without confrontation. The industry did not need to threaten, it simply reallocated opportunity. Silence was enforced structurally, through contracts and calendars, not intimidation. This context reframes Ellington's success. His rise was not the result of ignoring the system, but of mastering its constraints. He composed music that elevated venues rather than disrupted them. He cultivated an image that reassured owners and promoters. He avoided public conflicts that could ripple back into bookings. These choices did not diminish his artistry, they enabled it to continue. In an industry where many voices burned bright and disappeared quickly, longevity itself signaled alignment with power. Understanding Harlem jazz as an industry clarifies why the myth of pure freedom feels incomplete. Jazz did express creativity, innovation, and cultural pride, but it did so within boundaries. Those boundaries were invisible to audiences and critics, yet decisive for musicians. Ellington's genius thrived because it operated fluently inside those limits. The crown of the Jazz King was not seized through rebellion. It was earned through endurance in a system where being allowed to play mattered as much as how you played. For Duke Ellington, survival in Harlem's jazz world did not depend on confrontation or defiance. It depended on silence, not as absence of thought, but as a deliberate strategy. In an ecosystem where stages were controlled, schedules were negotiated behind closed doors, and careers could be paused without explanation. Speaking too loudly carried risk. Ellington understood that the most dangerous mistakes were not musical, but social. Saying the wrong thing, aligning with the wrong cause at the wrong time, or publicly challenging the invisible order could end access overnight. This silence was not passive. It was calculated restraint. Ellington avoided public political statements that could entangle his orchestra in controversy. He did not comment on club politics, booking practices, or the forces that shaped Harlem nightlife. While other artists burned brightly through protest or provocation, Ellington cultivated neutrality, presenting himself as a professional whose only concern was music. That image reassured club owners, promoters, and intermediaries who valued predictability above all else. In a controlled industry, predictability is currency. The myth often interprets this restraint as apolitical elegance, as if Ellington simply transcended conflict through refinement. The reality is more pragmatic. Harlem was full of talented musicians whose careers stalled not because they lacked skill, but because they challenged the balance that kept venues running smoothly. Silence functioned as a form of insurance. It signaled that Ellington would not disrupt operations, draw unwanted attention, or threaten established arrangements. In return, his orchestra received continuity. Residencies lasted, tours expanded, and his music reached audiences far beyond Harlem. This dynamic explains why Ellington's career shows fewer abrupt breaks than many of his contemporaries. He did not disappear and re-emerge. He did not cycle through bands and comebacks. Instead, his presence became constant, almost institutional. That constancy was not accidental. It reflected an understanding that longevity required self-censorship, not as moral compromise but as occupational necessity. In Harlem's jazz economy, silence was not weakness, it was competence. Importantly, this does not reduce Ellington to a pawn. Silence, in his case, was a choice within constraint. He chose to protect the space where his music could exist, even if that meant leaving certain truths unspoken. The cost of that choice was not public scandal, but internal discipline. He managed his image as carefully as his compositions, ensuring that nothing in his public persona threatened access to stages that sustained his orchestra. The lesson of this silence is uncomfortable because it complicates the romance of jazz as rebellion. It suggests that the artists who lasted longest were not always the loudest or most confrontational, but the most attuned to power. Ellington's survival strategy reveals a deeper truth about Harlem. Control did not require intimidation when opportunity itself could be withheld. In that environment, silence was not absence, it was alignment. And alignment, more than protest, determined who continued to be heard. To understand how Duke Ellington was able to remain visible for decades, we have to confront a question the myth avoids. Who actually controlled Harlem's stages? Audiences saw marquees and bandstands. Musicians saw something else entirely: gatekeepers. Club owners decided which orchestras received prime slots. Promoters controlled touring circuits. Booking agents filtered reputations before a single note was played. None of this power needed to announce itself. It functioned through permission, and permission could be withdrawn without explanation. In this ecosystem, the stage was not neutral ground. It was a resource. Access to it meant income, relevance, and continuity. Losing it meant silence. Harlem's jazz world did not rely on overt threats to maintain order. It relied on exclusion. Bands that disrupted the balance by attracting unwanted attention, challenging arrangements, or creating instability found themselves quietly replaced. No scandal followed. The phone simply stopped ringing. In an industry built on night-by-night bookings, disappearance could happen faster than confrontation. Ellington's presence across premier venues signals something important. He was not just admired, he was trusted by those who controlled access. Trust here did not mean friendship or ideology. It meant non-interference. Ellington's orchestra delivered excellence without volatility. Performances elevated venues rather than endangered them. Schedules were honored. Crowds were reliable. This reliability was powerfully attractive to owners whose priority was stability. In that sense, Ellington was not ruling the stage. He was being allowed to occupy it consistently. The myth of the Jazz King suggests sovereignty. The reality suggests conditional tenancy. Ellington's crown did not grant him authority over the ecosystem. It marked him as an asset worth keeping. Others, equally talented, cycled in and out because they failed to meet the system's unspoken requirements. Talent opened the door. Compliance kept it open. This distinction is crucial. It explains why success appeared smooth while the environment remained unforgiving. This is also why control could remain invisible. When power is exercised through scheduling and contracts, it leaves no bruises and no headlines. It shapes outcomes quietly. Harlem's jazz scene could present itself as vibrant and free while operating under constraints that were perfectly understood by those inside it. The audience applauded the music. The system managed the risk. By asking who owned the stage, the story shifts from individual brilliance to structural authority. Ellington's brilliance was undeniable, but brilliance alone does not guarantee permanence. Permanence requires alignment with those who decide who plays tomorrow. In Harlem, that alignment was never about guns or threats. It was about access, and access, once withdrawn, erased even the most gifted voices without a sound. By the time Duke Ellington was celebrated as the Jazz King, the price of that crown had already been paid in ways the myth rarely acknowledges. Success brought global recognition, touring, and permanence, but it also imposed discipline, self-regulation, and an unspoken obligation to never destabilize the ecosystem that sustained him. Ellington's fame did not grant him sovereignty over Harlem's jazz world. It placed him inside a set of expectations that narrowed his margin for error. The higher his profile rose, the more carefully he had to manage what he said, where he played, and how he was perceived. This cost was not measured in money or applause, but in constraint. Ellington's public persona remained impeccably controlled. Measured statements, elegant distance from controversy, and an almost ceremonial focus on music itself. The myth interprets this as refinement. The reality suggests risk management. In an industry where access could vanish without warning, even a hint of instability could ripple backward into bookings, residencies, and tours. The crown demanded reliability. Reliability demanded restraint. There is a deeper irony here. Ellington's music pushed boundaries, harmonically, structurally, culturally, yet his public life avoided friction. Innovation flourished on the bandstand, while silence protected everything around it. This division was not accidental. It allowed Ellington to expand jazz's language without challenging the powers that controlled its stages. The cost was a constant internal calibration. How far the art could go without threatening the conditions that allowed it to be heard. In this way, creative freedom existed inside limits, not beyond them. The crown also isolated. As Ellington became an institution, he stood apart from the volatility that consumed many contemporaries. Others flared and vanished. He endured. But endurance came with distance. from activism that could alienate gatekeepers, from disputes that could disrupt contracts, from alliances that might entangle him in conflict. The myth celebrates this as timelessness. The reality recognizes it as selective participation. To last, Ellington chose where not to stand. None of this diminishes his achievement. It clarifies it. Ellington's greatness was not just musical, it was strategic. He understood that in Harlem's jazz economy, longevity was the rarest victory. The cost of the crown was living with boundaries that never needed to be spoken aloud. He paid that cost quietly, and in doing so ensured that his music, if not his voice on power, would continue to be heard. The story of Duke Ellington endures because it feels safe. It allows us to believe that genius can rise untouched, that art can exist above power, and that success is simply the reward for brilliance. But the reality revealed here is far less comforting. Ellington's greatness did not unfold in a vacuum. It unfolded inside a system where control did not need violence, where careers were shaped not by threats, but by access, permission, and the ability to remain within invisible boundaries. This does not turn Ellington into a victim, nor does it diminish his legacy. It reframes it. His survival was not accidental, and it was not naive. It was intelligent adaptation. In Harlem's jazz ecosystem, the most dangerous move was not playing the wrong note, but challenging the structure that decided who could keep playing at all. Ellington understood that reality earlier than most. He chose silence where noise would have ended his career, and discipline where rebellion would have closed doors permanently. The uncomfortable lesson of this story is that the most effective power is often the least visible. Harlem Jazz did not need guns to control artists. It needed schedules, contracts, and the quiet authority to decide who appeared on stage tomorrow. By focusing only on Ellington's elegance, we miss the larger truth about the world he navigated, that survival in systems of power often belongs to those who understand when not to speak. When we listen to Duke Ellington's music today, we hear freedom, innovation, and beauty. What we rarely hear is the silence that made that music possible. And it is in that silence, not the applause, that the real lesson of Harlem's jazz king still lives.